It's a rainy, cloudy, but warm day in Bloomington. Welcome to IU Sports Sunday. Nick Rodecap with you. It's the last Sunday of March, which, wow, time flies when you're having fun. And Indiana athletics, at least some sports anyway, had a lot of fun this weekend. I'm talking, of course, about Indiana men's swim and dive, who capped off a historic season with a third-place finish at the NCAA championships in Washington State. The Hoosiers have been in the pool, one of the best programs in the nation for years, of course. And the Indiana men won 3 individual titles on the final night in Washington. It was really incredible for the Indiana men's swim and dive team coached by Ray Lewis and Drew Johansson, who are incredible coaches, both of them. The Hoosiers took home titles in the 1650 freestyle, the 200-yard backstroke, and the platform diving event. Indiana actually swept the diving events in the NCAA championships. Quentin Henninger won the 1-meter diving championship on Thursday. Carson Tyler winning the 3-meter and the platform events on Friday and Saturday, respectively. It's a program that I'm not going to say gets overshadowed, but definitely kind of goes under the radar on a national scale. If you're not really someone who follows swimming and diving, it's easy to, I think, sometimes forget how successful Indiana men's swim and dive actually is. But Zalan Sarkani became the first Indiana swimmer to win the 1,650-yard freestyle event since 1973. That is historic. Indiana won 5 individual titles at the NCAA championships this past week. That's its most since its last team national title in 1973 as well. So it is one of the best seasons in program history. And Quinn Henninger and Carson Tyler, both seniors, diving for Indiana for the final time last night. And Ray Lewis, the Indiana men's swimming coach, said it was a fantastic end to a magical season, and although Indiana came short for the national title, Ray Lewis said he has never been prouder of a group of men. They set a whole host of program records, and it's really incredible what Ray Lewis and Drew Johansson have built. The consistency is really incredible. Indiana Swim and Dive, on the men's side, is one of the most consistent programs on this campus, and it's been really special to be a part of it. Just watching along during my time here, swim and dive was the first sport I covered as a student journalist. The moment I stepped on campus, I thought, okay, it makes sense to cover them because they're successful and they don't really get a lot of coverage. So that was where I got my feet wet, covering Indiana athletics, and it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see. I think that it's a program that I think more people should go out and support. They don't have a lot of home meets. They take place mainly during the fall semester. It's just at the Student Recreational Sports Center at the SRSC. You just go in and you get to watch a program that sends athletes to the Olympics and wins national titles, and you get to do it for free if you're a student. So that's pretty cool. The atmosphere at those meets is fantastic as well. So Indiana men's swimming and diving, 3 titles on the final night alone, a third-place finish in Washington State. Texas took home the title, its 16th championship in program history, but the first under new head coach Bob Bowman, who coached Arizona State last season. Texas, Cal, Indiana, your podium. The Longhorns beating the Golden Bears by 19 points. But it seems like the same programs, Texas, Arizona State, Cal, Stanford, always very successful in swimming and diving. The Big Ten is a conference that the Indiana men have won 4 years in a row. And the Big Ten has some really good teams. Ohio State is also really good. They hosted the Big Ten championships this year, and Indiana was able to come away with the win in the end. So that was also incredible. Again, if you have a chance next fall, actually it was Minnesota that hosted, I apologize, Minnesota that hosted the Big Ten Championships. Ohio State hosts it sometimes. It rotates between different campus sites, but the Indiana men won it in Minnesota this year, the Big Ten Championship. It's the longest streak of Big Ten titles since Indiana won 20 straight between 1961 and 1980. The men made history this season, and it seems like they're always up there among the best, but this year they took it to another level. So huge congrats to the Indiana men's swim and dive team on a phenomenal season. And you will see some of these athletes swimming, of course, representing their countries in the coming years on the international stage because, yes, they are all that good. March Madness, of course, is somehow almost over, which makes me kind of sad. This is a tournament that has been the chalkiest tournament that I can remember. I will admit that being only 21 years old, I don't remember a lot of tournaments, but this one is one where I was in a bracket pool and I decided, you know what, I'm going to think about the upsets. And I feel like everybody who was upset-minded kind of picked the same ones. Drake over Mizzou, Colorado State over Memphis. Arkansas over Kansas was kind of a toss-up, and if 76-year-old, eighth-year senior Hunter Dickinson was a little smarter, maybe Kansas could have won that game, but he wasn't a little smarter. And, I mean, outside of BYU beating Wisconsin, this just felt like the ultimate chalk madness. So obviously, Creighton beat Louisville, but anybody who followed the ACC knew that Louisville was kind of overhyped, even though it felt like they were underseeded. I think the committee actually got that one right. And what we have now in the Final Four are a pair of 1 seeds and a pair of other 1 seeds in Houston and Auburn playing for a chance to make the Final Four today. And I bring all that up because, you know, it feels like even if Indiana would have made the tournament as one of the last 4 teams in, the Hoosiers really, I don't know, what, you go into the first 4, maybe you beat Xavier, maybe you beat Texas, maybe you beat UNC, and you go in, you lose to Ole Miss. Okay, cool. You technically made the tournament, but you wouldn't have actually won a tournament game. I wouldn't count a first 4 win as a tournament win because it's technically not part of the 64-team tournament. That's just me, though. So, yes, Indiana maybe got screwed by not getting in. North Carolina didn't deserve to be there, and Ole Miss only beat them 71-64. But I think the committee needs to figure some things out when it comes to the selection process. I don't think that any sitting athletic director should be on the committee, let alone be in charge of the committee, because that was the case for North Carolina, and that was the reason a lot of people think they got in, and that's certainly the reason I thought they got in. It just feels like a huge conflict of interest. And yeah, you know, they can say, oh, well, the athletic director is not in the room when the fate of that team is decided. You can say that. That doesn't mean people are going to believe it. And I know I certainly didn't believe it. And even if the athletic director isn't in the room, right, it's still very easy for the athletic director's presence on the committee to have an influence on the way the committee views that team, because you want to protect your relationship with such a powerful figure in the world of college athletics. So I do think that there needs to be a bit of a change in who is in charge of the committee, especially if that team happens to be right on the bubble, as was the case this year. But Indiana basketball is in a very... I'm not even going to say it's actually a weird spot. I know Wish TV, a local station out of Indianapolis, called it a mass exodus of players out of the program, being left with one scholarship player, who is Dallas James, who was added to the roster late last spring to fill the final scholarship spot and did not play a minute during a game this year. Called it a mass exodus. But this is something that happens every time there's a coaching change like this now. The players who were recruited by the coach that left might not want to play for the new guy. And talking about March upsets, I forgot about McNeese over Clemson, but again, the ACC was massively underwhelming this year, so that's not a surprise. But you look at players transferring out in large quantities when a coach leaves a program and is replaced by somebody new and unknown. That shouldn't be a shock to anybody. It really shouldn't. That's just kind of what happens. You know, these guys, especially now, they can test out, they can get NIL offers from other schools, and so what if Mackenzie Mbako said he's probably, there's no chance he's coming back to Indiana. Honestly, if I'm an Indiana fan, I'm completely fine with that, because this team yeah, they may have had all the talent in the world. They may have had the higher talent rankings, the higher transfer rankings than pretty much anybody else in the country. They didn't perform. And those transfers, with the exception of Oumar Ballo, really massively disappointing. And sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes it just doesn't fit. And that's okay. But, either you're graduating, in the case of Anthony Leal, Trey Galloway, Oumar Ballo, Langdon Hatton, and others, or you're transferring out. Either way, I would say if you're an Indiana fan, you wish those players the best, but also you're okay with moving on, because it's very clear that the current group of players was not getting it done the way that Indiana basketball should get it done. So I'm okay if Darren DeVries brings in an entirely new batch of players. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you, reminding you that it's a great time to save at IU Credit Union. Go to IUCU.org to see their most current money market savings and certificate rates. IU Credit Union, IUCU.org. And we're talking about IU men's basketball and how everybody's gone and how that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the transfer portal commitments are about to go crazy. They haven't gone crazy yet, but there's a lot of players entering the portal, which doesn't mean that they're leaving their programs. It just means that they're allowing other teams to contact them. Most of them will probably find what to them is a greener pasture somewhere, and that's okay. If you're Gabe Cupps leaving Indiana after being injured all of this year, transferring to Ohio State and getting $600,000, then good for you. That's a lot of money for Gabe Cupps, even if that is spread out over multiple years. That's a lot of money for Gabe Cupps, but Ohio State was willing to pay it. So Gabe Cupps left Indiana. And again, that's fine. I think that Indiana needs a roster change, shake-up, makeover, complete overhaul. I guess those are the words I would use to describe it. It's a team that was massively underwhelming this year, let's be honest. They came in as the pick by many to win the Big Ten. And with the roster that they had, with the production that those players had shown in the past, yeah, that actually seemed like it was pretty reasonable. But obviously that is not the case. That's not what happened. So Darren DeVries comes in, cleans house. That's okay. If you're an Indiana fan, I wouldn't freak out too much about it. Give it a month probably, and this roster will be completely reconstructed with players that Darren DeVries sees as better fit and the kind of players that he wants to bring in. I will say that the reaction from West Virginia fans to their head coach being hired away by Indiana was similar, if not more dramatic, than the reaction of James Madison fans when Curt Cignetti was hired back in November of 2023. I think that's a good thing. I think that means that Indiana may have made the right choice. And obviously Darren DeVries, I don't think, was on a lot of people's radars necessarily. But honestly, I don't even know if that's a bad thing. I think that if, Indiana did use the same search firm that they used to find Curt Cignetti, then great. There's a historical track record of success there. Even if that track record is just one coach at Indiana, that's fine. I would trust Scott Dolson to have made the right decision. And I think that maybe there will be some early speed bumps as DeVries adjusts to the Big Ten, but I think that Indiana fans should support him, and I don't think it's crazy to say that fans should support their head coach. I do think that Indiana fans can be very, very negative, very toxic even at times. Like there was a couple years back, a fan hand wrote a letter to Trace Jackson Davis basically saying that TJD had never actually accomplished anything at Indiana and that he wasn't a good leader and that he couldn't wait until he was gone. Trace Jackson Davis, who of course needs no introduction, one of the best basketball players, at least at the college level, to come out of the state of Indiana, and certainly to come out of Center Grove High School, and went down as one of the best big men in Indiana history by the time he graduated. I don't know what possessed that fan to write that letter, if you remember it from a couple of years back, but those are the kinds of things that you really just shouldn't have happen. If you're a fan of a team, you are supposed to support them even when things don't go well, because in sport, you're going to fail more than you succeed. That's just how it is. It's a zero-sum game at best. One team wins, another team loses. 50% of fans will go home unhappy on any given day. That's how it goes. That doesn't mean you stop supporting your team and just shower them with negativity. So I really hope that that's the kind of vibe that Indiana fans bring to Darren DeVries, to this roster, whoever ends up on it. Because Lord knows there's already enough pressure with this job, and the standard is there, and everybody knows what the standard is supposed to be. And I would venture a guess. I'm not a scientist, but I would think that all parties involved with the program want to reestablish Indiana as one of the national powers of college basketball, even when it's clear that that has not been the case for a while. Although I do think it is kind of ironic that Kelvin Sampson, of course, beat Purdue in Indianapolis. That was technically on Saturday morning, I guess, because the game started at 10:30 p.m. Eastern. That baseline out-of-bounds play for the game-winning layup was ridiculously smart, but also what in the world was Braden Smith doing, leaving the inbounder unguarded? I don't know. If Purdue is somehow able to keep their roster together from this year, because the only player with real production that they're losing is Caleb First. If they can keep their roster together, Purdue is going to be very scary next year. But if NIL comes knocking at the door, we know that Purdue does not have a good NIL base up in West Lafayette. If NIL rips that roster apart, then that loss to Houston is going to be particularly tough, because Purdue had the Cougars on the ropes. And when Cam Heide hit that 3 to tie it at 60, I was thinking, okay, there may actually be a chance that Purdue is the one doing the upsetting this year. And then some questionable calls down the stretch, a missed offensive foul, yada, yada, yada. And I have friends at Purdue. My best friend goes to Purdue. That was a game where, honestly, I felt like Purdue got screwed. And that's, for someone associated with Indiana to say, you might be shaking your head. But I felt like Purdue got screwed down the stretch in that game. Full disclosure, I did not really get a chance to pay attention to the first half because I was busy writing a baseball story. And oh boy, we have a lot to talk about with IU baseball. If you missed the bus, that's okay, because college baseball is weird, and MLB opening day was this past weekend, or I guess this past Thursday. The Yankees hit 1 billion home runs yesterday. I'd forgive you if you missed this. Indiana baseball hosted USC this weekend. The series is already over. They played a doubleheader on Friday, split it. Rubber match was yesterday with inclement weather coming in today. Indiana led the series finale against the Trojans. Off the top of my head, it was 12 to 3. Indiana led the series finale 12 to 3 after 4. Hoosiers scored 6 runs in the first 2 innings combined, and then 6 runs in the fourth. Took a 12-3 lead over USC in the series finale. Indiana blew that 9-run lead and lost 13-12. The Hoosiers have been hovering around 500 all season, and I can say all season now because we're 6 weeks in. Indiana is 15-13 and 6-6 in the Big Ten. And this is a team that has kind of followed the same blueprint for the last couple of years. Preseason hype lands them on the fringes of the top 25, and then they promptly fall flat on their face out the gate and desperately need a run in the final month and a half of the season to salvage their postseason hopes. That is where Indiana sits right now. Much like they were last year, smack dab in the middle of the Big Ten as far as baseball is concerned. 6-6, actually tied with USC, which is really funny. But Indiana and USC tied for, doing some mental math in my head, Iowa at the top, which, what in the world? Iowa's in first in the Big Ten. Iowa, UCLA, Oregon, your top 3. Northwestern, great turnaround for them after they only won 3 conference games last year. Washington tied for 4th. Michigan, Penn State tied for 6th. Indiana, USC tied for 8th in the Big Ten. And, of course, USC holds the tiebreaker. Below them, you have Illinois and Michigan State, who Indiana will play in consecutive weekends coming up, so that'll be pivotal. Purdue and Rutgers, and then Maryland, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Ohio State. Nebraska also off to a very poor start this season. After they won the Big Ten tournament last year, Illinois won the regular season title, and they, too, have also struggled. So, Indiana losing to USC yesterday. I, of course, covered the game. You can go read about it if you'd like. But it's like watching a train go off the rails in slow motion. The way that game unfolded yesterday, Indiana, it looked like it was in hand. I'm going to be honest, after the fourth. You think 12-3, there's a 10-run mercy rule. USC might have agreed to that before the game, considering they have to fly back to Southern California. And it just slipped away. It just felt like, okay, USC put up 4 in the sixth. That's fine. It's still 12-7. And then the Trojans keep scoring. They get 1 back in the 7th. They got 3 back in the 8th. And I turned to one of my other student reporters, Zach Horwitz, who does a fantastic job covering the team. He actually caught a foul ball yesterday, but I turned to him, I think maybe in the 7th or the 8th, and he looked at me and he said, "Are they going to lose this?" And I said, "Well, it's getting increasingly concerning by the second." It turned out Indiana did lose that game. And we talked to Jeff Mercer, the Indiana head coach, afterwards. Again, a 9-run lead in a series finale with the series tied at 1. That is a game you absolutely have to win, especially at this point in the season now, because Indiana is exactly halfway through. It's a 56-game regular season. They are 15-13 through their first 28 games. That's not the start that anybody was looking for. And yes, Indiana can turn it around on the diamond, but if you've played baseball, if you've followed enough baseball, you know those kinds of losses, the kinds of losses where you thought you had it wrapped up, those are the kinds of losses that can ruin your season. It really can. And you talk about, cleaning the slate, you let it feel bad for 24 hours and you move on. But, from here on out now, with Indiana's pitching staff as clearly as thin as it is, you can't rely on any of these lower leverage arms that Indiana has to hold even what should be the biggest lead that they're going to pitch with. It's a 9-run lead in the top of the 6th. And sure, you can say, well, why didn't the offense score after the 4th? I would counter that by saying anytime a team scores 12 runs, they should probably win the game. I don't know that that's a shocking statement, but I feel like anytime a team scores 12 runs in a Big Ten baseball game, that should be sufficient to win, because that's what good teams do. And right now it's clear that Indiana baseball, even though they have one of the most loaded lineups in the conference, they're hitting the cover off the ball almost every game. Now, UCLA got the better of them in Los Angeles last weekend. That was over spring break. UCLA got the better of them, but UCLA has a really good pitching staff, and the Bruins, not the Trojans. The Bruins are second in the Big Ten. They're 21-5. That's the most wins of any team in the conference. So you can live with 3 close losses to a team like UCLA. You cannot live with losing winnable games like this. And you might say, oh, well, it's just one game. Why are you overreacting? But Indiana has shown a propensity to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory multiple times this year. You look back to Indiana's early season slate, and it's bad loss after bad loss. The home loss to Northern Kentucky, that was back on March 4th, losing 13-11 at home to a Horizon League team. Giving up the lead in the top of the 10th in extra innings to Xavier on opening weekend. I believe Indiana no, they didn't take the lead in the 9th against UNLV. Gave up 4 runs in the top of the 10th to UNLV after tying it in the 9th. That was 2 days after their late loss to Xavier. Losing to Xavier again at home because they committed 3 errors, which led to a whole host of unearned runs. It's not just the one game that is concerning for Indiana. It's now a series of games, which when you stack them on top of each other, become particularly brutal, because even if you flip those 3 games, the 2 against Xavier are particularly important. The way the NCAA baseball selection committee works, a big portion of the selection criteria is the RPI. And for Indiana baseball, they played Xavier twice in the span of 11 days. Xavier right now sits 13th in the RPI. They're 14-14, but they're 13th in the RPI. The reason why is because they schedule extremely tough non-conference games with the hope that maybe they can steal a couple, and that way their RPI and their resume is good enough to make the dance, even if their record might not show that they deserve to be there. Xavier plays multiple SEC teams as part of their non-conference schedule. They have the second toughest non-conference schedule in the country and the number one overall toughest schedule in college baseball, which is why those two Indiana losses in very winnable games, again, giving up the lead in the top of the 10th, losing 8-6, and then turning around, hosting Xavier and losing 8-4 at home. That's why those losses are so important. You lose two opportunities to beat a very good team that you very easily could have beaten, and now you're 2 games above 500 instead of 4 games above 500 with no NCAA tournament resume wins on the ledger, and we're at the end of March. So you look at what Indiana has coming up. They have an opportunity to beat Louisville on Tuesday. Louisville is ranked number 18 in the country. That game will be on Big Ten Network at 6 o'clock on Tuesday, weather permitting, although it's going to be cold and gray and maybe rainy. Indiana will play Louisville, and they will have a chance, much like they did 2 years ago, to upset Louisville and get back on track. That's what happened in 2023. That was kind of what kickstarted that year's late season run. Then you host Michigan State, middle of the pack. Ball State, Illinois, Indiana State, all middle of the pack. Even Maryland isn't really that good this season. So Indiana has had chances to win these games, but now you're talking about a stretch where you can't really afford many more bad losses because none of the teams aside from Louisville are particularly good. The biggest series, I would say, of the season, not that they're all not big, but the biggest series, I would say, for Indiana is late April. It's actually Little 500 weekend against Iowa. Iowa, if the Hawkeyes remain as good as they are, will be near the top of the Big Ten. So if Indiana can go there and win 2 out of 3, then you'd feel pretty good about their chances of still making the NCAA tournament. But after yesterday's blown lead, a 9-run advantage they saw slip away, you start to feel like maybe this will be another disappointing season for Indiana baseball. It's certainly shaping up that way so far. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. The Indiana basketball high school state finals were last night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, which is why the NCAA tournament games are at Lucas Oil Stadium. But in attendance at those games was Darren DeVries, and the 4A game between Fishers and why do I not remember who won the game? Oh, goodness gracious. Now I have to look it up because I was thinking about IU baseball. It was Jeffersonville. Jeffersonville actually upset Fishers. The Tigers had won something like 43 straight games dating back to last year, and Jeffersonville somehow got it done inside a packed Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Darren DeVries was in attendance for that, and I wonder how he feels about the atmosphere, the fandom surrounding high school basketball in the state of Indiana, because I can't imagine he saw anything like it in West Virginia. It was a very cool experience 2 years ago, or 4 years ago? It was a while ago. 3 years ago, seeing Matt Painter and Tom Izzo courtside as Cathedral rolled over Chesterton in the 4A state final in 2022. They were both, I believe, looking at Xavier Booker, who was a junior at the time, for Cathedral. And that was an interesting development because Xavier Booker has been very underwhelming at Michigan State. I was rooting for him because he went to my high school. He went to Cathedral High School in Indy, but just has not at all lived up to the hype that he had coming out of high school, which kind of goes to show you that, well, you know, recruiting rankings don't mean a whole lot. You think about Curt Cignetti's mantra, production over potential. Yeah, I would say he's right, because you can come out of high school with all the stars and accolades and McDonald's All-American honors that you want, but if you don't get it done, then it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. So I'd be interested to see if Darren DeVries changes the way Indiana basketball has recruited, because you think in recent memory, especially under Mike Woodson, Indiana didn't necessarily recruit in this state, especially not as well as Purdue did. Goodness gracious. It's painful. I don't know. It was a little before I started paying attention to recruiting, but I don't know if Indiana. I'm sure Indiana did recruit. Yeah, he received interest from Indiana, but it was only after he got offered by Purdue, because Braden Smith, when he committed to Purdue out of Westfield High School, just north of Indy, had offers from App State, Belmont, Montana, North Texas, and Toledo. And it was only after he committed to Purdue that he got interest from Indiana, Gonzaga, Villanova, Xavier, Oregon, those kinds of teams. Why was Indiana not on that before? And I know it doesn't matter now, but why was Indiana not on that from an earlier age? It seems like there are so many guys from the state of Indiana. I mean, Ryan Conwell is another example, although he's in the portal right now. Nigel Pack as well, who played at Miami when they beat Indiana en route to the Final Four. Ryan Conwell went to Pike High School. And I don't know. He committed to USF, ended up in Indiana State, went to Xavier, now he's in the portal. I wouldn't mind seeing him in Indiana. If nothing else, just to be able to root for players from Indiana again. Obviously, Trey Galloway, Anthony Leal are gone now. They graduated. And I'm going to be brutally honest for a second. Anthony Leal was a Mr. Basketball coming out of high school, but it felt like, at least as an offensive player, he was great on defense, and it's a shame that he did not get named to the Big Ten All-Defensive Team this year, because he was phenomenal. But in terms of offensive production, let's be honest, he was a fifth-year senior who was scared to shoot as a former Mr. Basketball. And former again, recruiting rankings mean nothing once you get to college. But I'd like for Indiana to have a homegrown presence like a Braden Smith. And, you can get on me about that if you want, about, wanting a player like Braden Smith. Indiana fans watching Braden Smith do what he does at Purdue, it's kind of funny, because some people within the basketball program, at least under the old guard, still tried to live by the mantra that the best players from Indiana play at Indiana. That's just not true anymore. That's just straight up not true. Look at Purdue's roster from this year. This was a down year for them. They still made the Elite Eight and only lost to a 1 seed by 2 points, which what in the world? Not just a 1 seed, but a 1 seed in one of the most chalky brackets that we've had in a while. Fletcher Lawyers from Fort Wayne Homestead, Braden Smith's from Westfield, Trey Kaufman-Renz from Sellersburg, Miles Colvin's from Indianapolis. Miles Colvin, who made some big shots against Houston. It's just one of those things that's really confusing. Why has Indiana not tried to recruit the state of Indiana better in recent years? Instead, you go to the portal, you spend $1 bajillion on these guys who on paper might be better, right? But in actuality, again, production over potential, did not come anywhere close to what they were supposed to be. I think Indiana basketball, especially this past year, it felt like it was a bunch of hired guns, right? A bunch of mercenaries that came in and really just never meshed. Outside of an exhibition against Tennessee, which was an exhibition, so how much actual coaching went into that game, I don't know. And obviously Luke Goody, right? If he gets his waiver, that's a player from Indiana. He didn't even start his career here. And it's probably a good thing that he didn't, because he would have been playing under Archie Miller. Which, yeah, no. That is not good for anybody's development at all. But yeah, so I guess it's really confusing to me why Indiana doesn't recruit this state better. It feels like guys should grow up wanting to play at Indiana if you're from Indiana, right? But you look at the guys who are coming back, of whom there may be a maximum of 2, Dallas James and Luke Goody. Everybody else is gone, but this roster, Goody, Leal, Galloway. As far as players from Indiana who actually played, I'm not trying to erase Ian Stevens, who went to New Pal, or Langdon Hatton, but Langdon Hatton barely played. His biggest minutes came because Umar Ballo was out at the bars too late before Winthrop. I just wish that Indiana would have a stronger presence of players from this state, because that's the kind of roster makeup that historically made this team, this program, so successful. Mike Woodson as a player, of course, Woodson went to Broad Ripple High School, rest in peace. The high school, of course. Steve Alford is from Indiana as well. And, of course, we talked about what he said about the student-athlete being dead a few weeks back. But Steve Alford's from Franklin. Went to Chrysler High School in Newcastle. Those are the kinds of players that you can find from this state. And, again, I'd like to see Ryan Conwell come to Indiana. Reports say that Texas is the front runner for him right now. But seeing Ryan Conwell transfer back to his home state, I think, would be cool. He spent time at Indiana State before going to Xavier, but he'll be one and done over there. So if you want the best players from Indiana to play at Indiana, Darren DeVries, it's fine if you don't. It's fine if you want to go a different route and try to bring in guys from all around the country. Indiana just tried that, and it completely flopped, but you're welcome to give it your best shot, and Indiana fans should support you if you decide to do that. But if you want the best players from Indiana to play at Indiana, then I would recommend going that route, but also there is a lot of work to do. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Mike Kern, IU Sports Sunday. Nick Rotacap with you. It's officially spring sports season now, which is cool as someone who covers baseball and has done that for a few years. Indiana baseball is still in the middle of this homestand, and you can come out to Bart Kaufman Field, see if they can turn their season around. They're running out of time to do it, I'll be honest, but Bart Kaufman Field, still a good place to catch a game. They'll play Louisville on Tuesday and then host Michigan State 3 games this weekend, and this is now, I think, about halfway through this 16-game home slate that they're on right now. So it is a good place to catch a game. Also, IU softball, they're out of town this weekend, but there's not a bad seat at Andy Moore Field either. It's weird. It's weird, it flies by, the season does, and Indiana football ramping up spring practices again as well. Fernando Mendoza, Indiana's quarterback, transferring over from Cal to join his brother Alberto in the program here. At the quarterback position, said that he knows that he's got to be the guy. There's a lot of pressure on him, and this team's success is related to how well he performs on any given Friday or Saturday whenever Indiana plays, and he said he's okay with that role. He accepts that role. He welcomes the challenge. I'm really excited to see what Fernando Mendoza can do. I know spring practices, it's just practice, right? But it's exciting to be excited about Indiana football again, to be excited to be back in Memorial Stadium and covering those games, covering that team, and I cannot wait for when Indiana football season gets underway. But there's still a lot of time until then. There's a lot that's going to change. The spring game coming up in just about 3 weeks. I believe it's Saturday, April 17th or 18th, whatever day that is. It'll be Saturday, April 19th. They moved the game, or they moved it from Saturday to Thursday. It's the week of April 17th. Either way, the spring game, there will be more buzz around it, I think, this year compared to last year, but an exciting time to follow along with Indiana athletics. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. It just got darker outside. I think it's going to storm pretty bad later, which is why Indiana baseball is not playing today. I think that was pretty smart. I got to say, I am a fan of these Friday doubleheaders that they've been playing the last couple home series. They played one against Ohio State, had a run rule win, followed by a walk-off win. They split the doubleheader with USC a couple days ago, and then in their third game in 24 hours, blew a 9-run lead. But maybe, I don't know, maybe the weather is just a sign that the baseball gods are disappointed in the way that things played out. yesterday. You think you're up 12-3 in the fifth inning. Technically the top of the sixth, I guess. And if ESPN were to have a win probability graph, it would be at 99.9% in favor of the team leading 12-3, needing 12 outs to win the game. But that didn't happen. And I think the skies are about to open up as if it's a sign that Indiana let people down. I don't know. I could be totally making that up, but that's kind of what it feels like right now. You talk about a lack of pitching depth that this team has had in the last couple of years. Last year, Indiana baseball had a lot of injuries. Before the season, even back in the previous postseason when they lost Luke Sennard, their most dependable starting pitcher, to an elbow injury that sidelined him for all of last year. He has since been drafted by the Atlanta Braves and is now pitching in their organization. But Luke Sennard going down before the season even began. They lost all three starters before last year even began. So Indiana was spread extremely thin, and all things considered, still ended up making a pretty decent run towards the Big Ten semifinal. They were a win away from making the Big Ten championship, couldn't get it done because they had no pitching. And then ultimately ended up in Knoxville, where they lost to the eventual national champion Tennessee Volunteers and Southern Miss as well. But Indiana this year had everybody healthy on the pitching side before the season began, and thought that while maybe they didn't have three weekend starters like you see in other conferences, it's kind of the norm in the SEC and the ACC even. But in the Big Ten, it's less common for teams to have three actual weekend starters. And that was the case for Indiana. They really only had one or maybe two coming into this season, Ben Grable and Cole Gilly. Gilly transferred over from Indiana State. Grable came over from Northwestern prior to last year, but missed the entire season with an elbow injury, recovering from Tommy John surgery. So for Grable and Gilly, those guys have been pretty reliable. But yesterday, Grable got the start for Indiana, and Jeff Mercer said that Grable didn't really feel too good the day before yesterday. He was coming off an outing at UCLA where he threw over 100 pitches, comes back, faces USC on Saturday, so it's about a week's rest for him. Grable, a starter you can usually count on for at least 5 innings, and he wasn't bad. He wasn't bad at all for Indiana. The problem is he only went 3 innings, threw 60 pitches in those 3 innings, and his day was done. So you're missing 2 innings of production right there. Another key arm in the back end of the bullpen, Drew Burr, who you can count on for as much as 4 innings in relief for Indiana, really emerged as Indiana's most dependable relief pitcher last year. Burr is injured right now as well. So he was out, and this was a game where you need to win the series, so maybe if Grable goes down early, you put Drew Burr in. But he was unavailable, like I said, due to injury. No Jackson Yarberry either, a guy who Jeff Mercer said after the game they may have turned to. Instead, they turned to Anthony Gubitosi, the transfer from Delaware. And, Indiana's got a lot of these older transfer guys who came over from lower-level Division I schools. And they just haven't really... It's a combination of the transfers not panning out, I should say, and the freshmen just not being ready yet. And it's very tough as a true freshman, to pitch at the college level, especially in the Big Ten, especially with hitters as old and as experienced and as talented as they are. But Anthony Gubitosi comes in out of the bullpen in the 4th inning and does well in the first 2 innings of his relief outing, comes back out for the 6th, and usually when a reliever comes out for a 3rd inning of work, team's probably seen him once in the game already. They're starting to figure out his stuff. Gubitosi in the 6th inning ended up walking the bases loaded. And at this point, again, Indiana was up 12-3. Gubitosi walks the bases loaded. It's clear that he's frustrated with himself just by his body language, and he's also out of gas. So Jeff Mercer said that pitching coach Dustin Glant actually wanted to make the change away from Gubitosi before the sixth, and go to Aiden Decker-Petty, a hard-throwing righty, to kind of counteract Gubitosi being a low 90s lefty. But Mercer said, well, Gubitosi's throwing strikes, and we're really thin in the bullpen, so I want to stick with Gubitosi. And that proved to be the wrong move, because Gubitosi comes out for the sixth, walks the bases loaded with one out, and then Indiana has to go to the bullpen. Aiden Decker-Petty comes out and just drills the first guy that he faces. That forces in a run, makes it 12-4. So then, a couple batters later, Decker-Petty gives up a bases-clearing double. And then, at that point, you're a little bit more concerned because now it's 12-7. Decker-Petty gets a clean inning after that, and largely clean. He gave up one run in the seventh, so it's 12-8 at that point. And that was about the time that I turned to one of my other reporters, and I said, well, I don't know if they're going to lose this, but this is definitely way closer than it needs to be. So there was the run that scored in the seventh was unearned. That made it 12-8. It was a high chopper to the second baseman, Tyler Cerny, and it was a play where he should have either just thrown across his body to first base or put it in his pocket. Instead, he tried to backhand flip the ball to the shortstop covering second base, and his momentum took the throw to the wrong side of second. It ended up rolling into left field, and everybody was safe. So that was kind of one of those where, the second baseman tries to do too much, and you come away with nothing when you could have at least gotten one out and traded a run for that out and still been up 4. That was the only run Indiana gave up in that inning. And then in the eighth, it became a 2-run game when UCLA, these West Coast schools, when USC's two-way star, that's who he is, Ethan Hedges, total stud, fantastic as a third baseman and as a pitcher, not a combination you see a lot of at this level, but Hedges homered for the second time in the game. A 2-run homer to left that was comfortably a home run. It was a 2-run bomb that brought USC back to within 2. And that was the point where you really started to panic, because in that eighth inning, Caleb Koski pitched to start the inning. USC had faced him on Friday night. They had seen him less than 24 hours prior, but Indiana's bullpen was so thin. We mentioned the injuries, the lack of reliable arms. Jacob Vogel, one of those guys who Indiana turned to last year, late in games when they needed outs. Vogel had some sort of shoulder issue, and his velocity is not back where it needs to be, and Vogel doesn't really have many off-speed pitches, especially a breaking ball that he can command. So him going out there was not really favorable in the eyes of Mercer. So Indiana sticks Koski out there for the second time in 24 hours. Lo and behold, that did not go well. Ethan Hedges hit a 2-run homer, and then Bryce Martin Grudzielanek singled to left, and that made it a 1-run game. And that was where the panic button really started to go off. Koski did not record an out in the eighth, was charged with 2 runs, and then Trey Telfer comes in, gives up the single to Grudzielanek, who, if the name rings a bell, it's because his dad played Major League Baseball for 15 years. But Bryce Martin Grudzielanek singles to left off another freshman, Trey Telfer, and now, oh boy, it's a 1-run game, and Indiana hasn't scored since the 4th. USC, their bullpen really shut Indiana down in the back half of that game, which is not easy to do. Although I guess it might be easier when you have no pressure on you because your team's losing by 9 and on the verge of getting mercy ruled. But for USC, the bullpen arms did a great job keeping Indiana's lineup quiet in the back half of the game. Indiana did not score in the bottom of the 8th. Not only did they not score, but it was the top of the Indiana lineup, 1, 2, 3, Andrew Wiggins, Devin Taylor, Corbin Dickerson. All of them went down in order. Weak contact and a strikeout to cap it off, and that sent us to the 9th. And you thought maybe, given that USC had already tagged Telfer for 1 run, that Indiana was going to go maybe to Jacob Vogel, who had only pitched once this season before yesterday, after being a guy who I believe threw about 20 innings over maybe 17, 18 appearances as a true freshman last year, was huge for Indiana late in the season, especially against Purdue. in that big series where Indiana had back-to-back comeback wins to take the series. Vogel was huge for them. He's no stranger to high-leverage innings, but he did not come out to start the ninth. Instead, it was Trey Telfer, a true freshman, who came out to start the ninth. And it was bad. It was very bad because it began right away. It was an infield hit off the bat of A.V. Covarrubias, the USC leadoff man, to start the ninth. It was one of those high choppers up the third base line. Freshman third baseman Will Moore comes in, should have put it in his pocket and just held him to an infield hit. That's fine because you have the double play in order. That's great. But he decided that making this circus throw, and because Indiana's field is turf, you can sometimes get away with intentionally one-hopping or two-hopping a throw to first just to get the ball out of your hand quickly. But Moore basically just threw a ground ball to first base. It got past the first baseman, also a freshman, Jake Hanley, who has been very good at first base this year. It got past him. He should have just come off the bag because the throw was never going to beat the runner. And you might say, well, you're not a college baseball player. You can't tell him what he was supposed to do. I played a lot of first base, and in those kinds of situations, it's clear the runner's going to beat the throw. Your number one goal is to keep the ball in front of you. So Hanley almost just come off the base, go down to a knee, block it with your chest, just swallow the ball up. Instead, it gets by him into foul territory. The runner advances to second. So now USC has the tying run on second base. Keep in mind, they were trailing by 9 runs in the top of the 6th with nobody out. USC now has the tying run aboard. It's 12-11. The tying run's at second base with nobody out. Telfer strikes out the next man, Andrew Lamb. And then the top of the lineup comes back up, and the USC leadoff man, Braden Dowd, their center fielder, who did not have a hit yet in that game, but had 3 walks to that point. So it's clear he was seeing the ball really, really well. Dowd comes up, 2 strikes on him. It's a 2-2 count. The fans are juiced up because they know that this game hangs in the balance too. And Dowd, the left-handed hitting center fielder, gets a fastball up and in, just turns on it and crushes it down the right field line. A no-doubt homer that he just hooked around the foul pole, and it's 13-12 USC. So Indiana has officially blown a 9-run lead, and USC caps it off with a moonshot home run. And it was just wow. It felt like, it really did feel like watching a slow motion car crash or a slow motion plane crash or a train derailment or a tsunami landing on a major city or something that you'd see in a movie. Like it was you knew it was bad. You knew that it was really, really bad news, but you just couldn't look away. Because on one hand, you have a phenomenal comeback by USC. Again, usually in these games, there's a 10-run mercy rule after 7 innings. But Indiana was up 9 in the 6th, hypothetically, needing 6 outs for the mercy rule, and they ended up giving up 10 unanswered runs in the final 4 innings. So then, a couple pitches later, Ethan Hedges, who already had 2 home runs to that point, smokes one to short off the glove of the freshman shortstop, Cooper Malamazian. So if you're keeping track, freshman pitchers, freshman third baseman, freshman shortstop, freshman second baseman. Malamazian kicks it, and that ball was smoked off the bat. It was probably at least 110 miles an hour off the bat of Ethan Hedges. He reaches, and Jacob Vogel then enters the game, gets the next man to pop up, and picks off Hedges to end the inning. So Indiana's down 1 going into the bottom of the 9th, having not scored since the 4th. Wouldn't you know, Ethan Hedges, the man who began the game as the third baseman and had a phenomenal afternoon, a pair of homers, 3 hits, 5 RBIs, comes out to the mound to close it out. And this is when I say that he's a two-way star, this is what I mean. You don't see these guys in college baseball very often. You see some guys listed as two-way players, but they don't actually play both ways. Ethan Hedges does. He comes out for the 9th, goes from third base to the mound with his team up 1. This is something that he's done a few times this year. 3 separate games entering yesterday where he had recorded a save and hit a home run in the same game. So Hedges comes in, gets the first two men out very unceremoniously, both of whom, Jake Handley, Tyler Cerny, have home run power. Cerny had already homered yesterday in that game. Handley had homered twice in the first two games of the series. Hogan Denny comes in at the DH spot, singles through the 5-6 hole with Indiana down to its final strike, and then the next man grounds into a fielder's choice and the game is over. Those are the kinds of games that really can deflate your whole season, because it's not just that Indiana blew a 9-run lead. You can frame it that way. You can frame it as USC coming back from down 9. But when you're at home and the other team has flown 2,500 miles to play you in your house, it's a game that you should win. And Indiana may have known, they were thin on the pitching side. That doesn't excuse it. If you want to separate yourself in the Big Ten and in the postseason as well, this is a team that had aspirations of hosting a regional. That's gone now. Unless you would have to basically go undefeated for the rest of the season. That's about 28 games straight. You would basically have to go undefeated, or at the very least win probably about 85% of your games, including winning a couple games in the Big Ten tournament, to even have a chance at hosting. And even then, it's very unlikely. Very, very unlikely, because the hosting spots go to the top 16 teams in the country. And right now, Indiana's nowhere close. They haven't been all year. So this game yesterday showed just how thin Indiana's pitching staff actually is. And sure, you could maybe say that, Drew Burr being hurt, that stinks. You get about 4 or 5 innings from him over the course of a weekend. They'd be really good innings. But that's 4 or 5 innings. You still need to account for a lot more production than that. And it's clear that Indiana just doesn't have the pitching staff right now. The offense is one of the best in the Big Ten, if not the country. And I'm not saying that as hyperbole. Indiana's offense is one of the best in the nation. And it's something that they cannot waste. But they're wasting it. And it's tough. It's tough to watch. Because you've got at least two guys who are going to be top 2 round picks, if not first rounders. Devin Taylor will go in the first round. He will break he will break the career home run record this year at Indiana. That will happen. He's already hit more than Kyle Schwarber did here. Corbin Dickerson, coming out of nowhere over from Louisville, where he didn't play much, will probably also be a first or second round pick. Jake Handley will be a high round pick in a couple of years. They've got a ton of talent on the offensive side. Indiana actually tied with Purdue right now for runs scored. 16th in the nation with 225 runs scored. Now, teams haven't all played the same amount of games, but Indiana is up there with some of the best offenses in the country. I would say the top 20 offenses in Division I baseball, which is very elite company to be in. You cannot waste that kind of production again. But that's exactly what Indiana's doing. 24th in the nation in slugging percentage at .530. That's just below Mississippi State and Texas and Alabama as well, all in that .530 neighborhood. This offense is really good. And again, they scored 12 runs in 4 innings yesterday, and it still was not enough to win. And mentally, you got to think that starts to wear on them a little bit. As, okay, we can do everything right. And okay, fine. Maybe they should have kept pouring it on, scored 15 runs, and gotten out of there with a run rule. But come on. 12 runs in a college baseball game should be enough to win. End of story. And you've got people now calling for Indiana's pitching coach to be fired. Dustin Gallant, who makes a lot of the pitching plans. You want to give some slack, and I and the rest of the IU baseball media have given him some slack over the last couple of years because of the injuries, and it's tough to replace that production. But at some point, I feel like you've got to, and I know that the stuff is not where it used to be for Jacob Vogel, but he was a guy who, again, pitched in a lot of those high-leverage innings last season for Indiana. Trey Telfer is a true freshman. Very little, if any, college experience, period, let alone with the game on the line. Let Jacob Vogel go and work, I would say, in that spot. And that was something Jeff Mercer said after the game, was that, okay, yeah, maybe in hindsight, have Vogel start the ninth. Okay, that's great. Hindsight's a heck of a drug, but you've got to make that decision in the moment. And to stick with the true freshman who had already gotten tagged for a run, it's setting him up for failure. And Mercer said that by keeping Anthony Gubitosi out there when Dustin Glant wanted to take him out, he walked Indiana right into the situation he was trying to avoid. But it's just you cannot set your players up for failure like that. And expect that not to have some sort of long-term consequence. What does that do for Trey Telfer's confidence, right? A guy who you've turned to as a true freshman. Well, in the back of his mind, he's thinking, man, I just blew this game. Whether he did or not, you didn't lose that game in the ninth. You lost that game in the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th innings. But as a freshman, you gave up the game-deciding home run. That's going to wear on you. And, Indiana, they like playing the young guys, but it's clear that the young pitchers are not even close to ready yet. So I'm very interested to see how they respond. Louisville is top 20 in the country. They are ranked. They are very good, as they always are. I'm very interested to see how Indiana responds, because it seems like this is a stretch that could really define Indiana's season, and you'd hate to see them disappoint for the second year in a row. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back at IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you, reminding you that it's a great time to save at IU Credit Union. Go to iucu.org to see their most current money market savings and certificate rates. One of those rare Sundays in spring with no college baseball in Bloomington. It was really dark. It was really dark earlier. They moved the games around, of course, because of the weather. It's less dark now, but it's still obviously going to start pouring rain here in a little bit. So it might be a good day to just stay inside and watch college basketball, because we've got 2 more spots in the Final Four up for grabs, and boy, oh boy, for the sake of the Big Ten, I hope Michigan State somehow finds a way to beat Auburn. I don't know that there's a snowball's chance in where that it's going to happen, but just for the sake of not having 4 1 seeds make the Final Four, I mean, goodness gracious. Goodness gracious. I keep calling this tournament Chalk Madness, because it is Chalk Madness. It feels like the one year I think about upsets in my bracket. Oh, that's okay. Every higher seed is going to win pretty much every game at this point. The one exception being that St. John's lost to Arkansas. So naturally, I had St. John's going the furthest of any 2 seed, which in hindsight was not very smart. I don't know why. It just feels like it's harder to be and I know March Madness is great, and it's always great, but it's harder to be invested in it when Indiana is nowhere close to it, when Indiana doesn't even have a chance at it, as a neutral observer, it's fun to watch these games and just enjoy them as the spectacle that they are, right? But at the same time, when you, as a student at a university known for its basketball success, when you don't have any connection to the tournament, just seeing your school represented, it's tougher to care about it, I feel like. I was invested in the college football playoff this year more than I ever have been, because Indiana was actually in it. And I know, Indiana lost to Notre Dame in the first round. Indiana was in the college football playoff, man. Come on. Do you know how crazy that is? If you would have told me in 2014 that Indiana would be in the college football playoff, I would have said you were crazy. I think everybody would have said you were crazy. But that happened. That is a real thing that happened. Indiana was a college football playoff team. And I was invested in it because Notre Dame was clearly the better team that night. Sitting high atop Notre Dame Stadium watching that game unfold, it was very clear Notre Dame was the better team. They deserved to win. And I was interested to see if what ended up happening was going to happen, where the 2 teams standing at the end of the playoff were the 2 teams that beat Indiana. And that is exactly what happened. And it was cool to have that connection, having covered a college football playoff game, having covered that team for the whole season, and seeing the extremely high caliber of competition that ultimately befell Indiana, that was cool. I was invested in it. Even though Indiana was out, there was still that connection. In the college baseball and college softball postseasons, Indiana has been a part of them the last couple of years. Indiana baseball especially, given that I cover the team, they lose to Kentucky in a very, very close and competitive regional 2 years ago. I was interested to see how far Kentucky would go, and ultimately they lost to a loaded LSU team, of course, led by Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz. But it was fun to see that those teams that had to go through Indiana. And then last year, of course, going down to Knoxville, covering Indiana when they played Southern Miss, they upset Southern Miss, and then they played Tennessee, and those fans are incredible. Incredible. I did leave that city with Rocky Top stuck in my head, but those fans, that atmosphere at Lindsey Nelson Stadium, one of the coolest atmospheres I have ever experienced in any sport. So I was pulling for Tennessee because I wanted to see, okay, well, if this team's going to have a hand in ending Indiana's season, at least have them win the whole thing. That was ultimately what happened. Now, Tennessee got some interesting umpiring decisions to go their way, but at the end of the day, they got it done. They won 60 freaking games in a college baseball season, which only encompasses about 70 games if you're one of the last teams standing in Omaha. And also having experienced the atmosphere at Charles Schwab Field when Indiana played Nebraska in the Big Ten tournament, those are the kinds of things that give you a connection to these events. You know, even though you're just covering them as part of the media, still traveling to these places, going to these events, broadcasting, writing, whatever it is, you have a connection to them. I broadcasted 8 or 9 Indiana men's basketball games for WIUX Student Radio this year, and Indiana got left out, and I wasn't even surprised. I wasn't upset that they got left out. I wasn't shocked. I didn't feel anything because it was the most likely outcome. Given that I was on the call for Indiana's losses to, off the top of my head, Nebraska, Iowa, Maryland, Michigan, UCLA. 5 head-scratching losses, 2 of them blowouts, 3 of them close, winnable games that slipped away. Those games, losing all of those games, having seen all of those losses in person, once Indiana lost to Oregon in the Big Ten tournament, you knew the season was over. It wasn't just that Indiana lost to Oregon in that game; it was that it was an embarrassing loss. It was that the game was being played an hour from Indiana's campus, and they fell flat on their face again. So that's why I wasn't surprised when they got left out. Sure, North Carolina being in was a travesty, but Indiana wasn't even the first team out of the field. It was West Virginia. And West Virginia actually did get robbed. West Virginia got flat out robbed. So I guess it's kind of poetic that then their head coach jumps ship to come to Indiana, with the hopes of getting back to the NCAA tournament and yada, 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 right? But Indiana didn't even get screwed the worst out of all of them. It was West Virginia. West Virginia was better than North Carolina in every conceivable metric. And one of the reasons the committee left West Virginia out was because Tucker DeVries was hurt back in December? Really? 2 months worth of games just ignored? Oh, they didn't take advantage of quad 1 opportunities. North Carolina was 1-12 in quad 1s. All this is to say that it's harder to be invested in March Madness now this year, and really, I mean, even the last handful of years, outside of maybe hoping that a Big Ten team would somehow beat UConn, a glorified NBA team, last year with Purdue. Call me crazy. I wanted to see Purdue beat UConn just so that the Big Ten could win a national championship again. And that way, Indiana's 2 blowout losses last year to Purdue would at least make a bit more sense. I want to see a Big Ten team win it all. And at this point, I don't care who it is because I'm pretty sure all undergraduates actually have never seen a Big Ten team win a national championship. Which, what in the world? That's crazy. That is actually insane to think about. Because the last team to do it, Michigan State, 25 years ago. Wow. So I guess 24 tournaments because of COVID. But goodness gracious. And now, the entire conference's hopes rest once again on Michigan State in what has been one of the most loaded tournaments ever. At least as far as the 1 seeds go, they are ridiculously good. So much so that Alabama hung 113 on BYU, and then Duke held them to 65. Good luck. But yeah, it's just harder to be, I guess, emotionally invested. Obviously, you're still going to follow the storylines, you're still going to watch the games because the broadcasts are well done, because the music is iconic, the imagery, the pageantry, the spectacle of it is iconic. But it's just not the same when you don't have that connection to it. And hopefully, for Indiana basketball, Darren DeVries, has Indiana playing meaningful basketball in March again. Because, let's be honest, Indiana's never won the Big Ten tournament, which is also crazy to think about. Indiana's never won the Big Ten tournament, but you think back to Mike Woodson's first season, Indiana getting to the Big Ten semifinal, losing to Iowa because Jordan Bohannon was 97 years old and hit that ridiculous bank shot. But that's meaningful basketball in March. And yeah, for Mike Woodson's first season, that was good. That was good. Getting Indiana back in the postseason conversation, considering what Archie Miller did, that was great. And, beating Kent State in the NCAA tournament the following year and losing to Miami, okay, fine. Maybe try to build on that. It didn't happen. But now, if Indiana can play meaningful basketball in mid-March and shoot, even April while we're at it, that would be a huge, huge paradigm shift. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. Indiana spring practice for football has ramped up. I actually saw them practicing outside before Indiana baseball blew a 9-run lead yesterday. The spring game is Thursday night again. It was initially scheduled for Saturday, April 19th at noon, but they moved it to Thursday at 8, April 17th, 8 p.m. That is coming up in just over 2 weeks. Goodness gracious, the end of the school year will be here before you can say hippocampus 3 times fast. Wow. That's nuts to think about, although I guess it's not that crazy because Little 500 quals were yesterday. So it's approaching, and it's approaching fast. And if the school year is coming to a close, then that means football season's almost back. And that is a great thing. So April 17th, 8 p.m. is the spring game. 18 days, 10 hours, and counting. Spring practice ramping up. Some of the transfers starting to make some buzz, of course, top among them being Fernando Mendoza. And I think even though quarterback coach Tino Sunseri is gone, he's at UCLA as the offensive coordinator now. I think if Curtis Rourke put up one of the greatest seasons in Indiana football history on a torn ACL, then I am over the moon excited about what Fernando Mendoza can do, especially behind a functional offensive line. That was kind of the big thing for him at Cal, was that he was throwing under duress so much. So Curt Cignetti said a couple weeks back that Indiana's been emphasizing making sure he's protected and he has time to actually make plays behind center. That includes with his legs as well, something that Curtis Rourke rarely, if ever, did. Now, of course, we know why, because he only had one ACL, which, what in the world, man? That's nuts that he was still able to put up those numbers. But I like I said before, I cannot wait for August 30th versus Old Dominion. It's going to be hot, but it's going to be buzzing at Memorial Stadium. And then September 20th, the first Big Ten game against Illinois. That was the first IU football game I ever went to as a student, was Indiana-Illinois in 2022. If you remember, Connor Bazelak and Sean Shivers. Yeah, those are two players who did indeed play for Indiana. That was actually a very fun game, though. Came down to a game-winning drive in the final 2 minutes. I believe Sean Shivers had the game-winning touchdown rush in that game, so that was fun. I'm just hoping, if nothing else, for Don Fisher's sake, that Indiana gets a season where basketball and football are both successful on a national scale at the same time. Because if anybody deserves that, it's him. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, we talked about the exodus of players for Indiana men's basketball, but the same sort of thing has kind of happened on the women's side as well. Of course, the women fell to South Carolina for the second year in a row, this time in the round of 32. And it's kind of interesting because they've lost a whole bunch of players to the portal already, none of whom really produced that much. if I'm being honest. You think about the players in the portal for Indiana. The biggest name they lose is probably Lily Meister, along with Juliana Lamondola, Alexis Bargasser, Henna Sandvik, Charnice Curry-Jelks. But really, Meister and Bargasser are the only ones that saw meaningful minutes for a good portion of this past season. The problem is that you combine that with the fact that Chloe Moore McNeil and Sydney Parrish are graduating. This team, this roster, is going to look very, very different going into next year. Not that that's a bad thing, but I guess a lot of the old guard and Moore McNeil and Parrish will be gone. Meister played from her freshman year, if nothing else, as a backup post player to Mackenzie Holmes, and then got some starts this year. Fell out of the starting rotation in favor of the Tennessee transfer Caroline Striplin. It's going to be very, very different for Indiana women's basketball moving forward, but still, 10 consecutive 20-win seasons under Terry Morin. That is the model of consistency. And Dawn Staley spoke very highly of Terry Morin, saying that she's got the right people. She coaches to her players' strengths. Sometimes you just have to get lucky. And getting lucky in Indiana's case in the NCAA tournament would be not running into South Carolina last year when they were going on their undefeated run to a national title, and this year when they were the defending national champions. And still dancing is South Carolina. Dawn Staley, a phenomenal coach. One of, if not the best, in all of women's college basketball, although Gino Auriemma would certainly have a thing or two to say about that. UConn, you want to talk about consistency. Whew, wow. But I trust that Terry Morin will have Indiana fighting near the top of the Big Ten again next year, because that's just kind of what Indiana women's basketball fans have become accustomed to. And that, I think, is a testament to her ability and those that she surrounds herself with as a head coach. A phenomenal head coach in all aspects. We've got two big games coming up this afternoon. The last two regional finals as we set up the Final Four. Pre-game coverage begins at 1 Eastern, and the Midwest Regional Final at 2 p.m., followed by the South Regional at 5 p.m., setting the stage for the Final Four in San Antonio coming up next weekend. You've been listening to IU Sports Sunday.